Ever wondered what spiders, heights, and public speaking have in common? Well, according to psychological research, they are the top 3 biggest fears we all share. On this week's episode, we have the pleasure of meeting Matt Abrahams, a seasoned communications expert and Stanford lecturer who is here to help us conquer our fears and unlock the secrets of effective communication. We'll dive into Matt's incredible journey, discussing personal and professional development, networking, and of course, tackling the fear of public speaking head on. If you've ever found public speaking or communication in general to be a daunting challenge, then you're in the right place. Matt has a wealth of tips and insights to share, so get ready to boost your confidence and communication skills. Enjoy the show. Hello, Matt. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
I am excited to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Great. Before we get into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how long you've been doing it for?
Well, sure. So I am somebody who is passionate about communication. And for the last 25 years, I've been focused on teaching and coaching communication skills. Currently, I teach at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, where I'm a lecturer and teach strategic communication. I also have the pleasure of being a host for the Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast, which is all about communication skills. And then I also write books. I have a book already out called Speaking Up Without Freaking Out. And I also have a new book coming out called Think Faster, Talk Smarter. So everything I do is related to communication. Prior to that, I worked in high tech. I ran learning and development for a decade for software companies. And really enjoyed that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And this is a podcast, so I'd love to know what podcasts you enjoy listening to.
So there are many. Yours is a great podcast for sure. I listen to podcasts to learn and to personally develop. So I'm a huge fan of Andrew Huberman's Huberman Lab podcast. That is all about personal development and professional development. I like Freakonomics and Hidden Brain as well. So these are all podcasts from which I can learn.
Yeah, it's so good, isn't it? Because I think with podcasts, you can learn while doing something else. And it doesn't feel quite as self-indulgent as perhaps sitting down with a book to learn during the day, to take an hour out during the day to learn. You can listen while you do. And I think that's just the great thing about podcasts.
Yeah, our podcast actually won best commute podcast and best dog walking podcast because we're 20 to 25 minute episodes. And that's how long people commute and walk their dogs. So you're absolutely right. People are doing other things when listening.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Now, we're not going to go into all of your areas of expertise today. Rather, we're going to cover your career journey. And so I'd love to start by asking you, when you were a kid, what did you want to do when you grew up?
So that's a great question. So I really wanted to be a movie director. I was really, really interested in film and television. And this is back in the day when we all had these 8mm cameras with real film. This was pre-video, although video didn't come out towards the end of my childhood. And I actually got into film school. And the biggest career decision I've ever made in my life was really before I had a career, which was to decide either to go to film school or to not go to film school. And I opted not to. I lived my life by this notion of trying to keep as many opportunities available as possible. And I felt that film school, while passionate about that, would limit some of the potential opportunities in the future. So I chose not to do that. I went to Stanford University as an undergrad and everything else unfolded in a way that I'm very pleased.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And so what did you end up studying at Stanford?
Well, that's an interesting question, too. So I started my undergraduate education thinking I wanted to be a doctor. I met calculus and organic chemistry, and they told me differently. So I actually discovered psychology. I had always thought psychology was something that you did if you wanted to be a therapist, and I had no interest in being a therapist, but I became very fascinated with the social sciences My undergraduate degree is in psychology. My graduate degree is in communication. So I sort of stumbled into what I found passionate. I found I was passionate about because I didn't know these things were areas of study
Yeah.
prior to actually experiencing them. So I was not one of those people who said, I want this and started in school for that.
Yeah.
I found my way and I'm very happy to have done so.
Yeah. And when you were going through, your education journey, who were you talking to about careers and career decisions and so on?
Not many people. So I
Yeah.
was very fortunate that my family did not put a lot of pressure on me to quickly find a career. They definitely wanted me to be self-sufficient and off the family
Yeah.
payroll for sure. But I did have friends that were more focused than I in terms of knowing what they wanted to do.
Mhm.
And so I would check in with them occasionally. There were career advising services that I made took advantage of, but I certainly did not have a lot of advice and guidance early on in my career journey.
Yeah. And when you were coming to the end of your studies, had it begun to emerge what you might do with those studies in terms of a career?
Yeah, so for my undergraduate, it was economically, we were in the midst of a big recession. There were not a lot of jobs available. And I had just discovered the field that I really am passionate about still to this day. So I
Yeah.
went immediately to grad school. There were lots of
Yeah.
forces in that direction. I was interested in learning more. There were no job opportunities
Yeah.
particularly. That to me was actually pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
Coming out of grad school, that was a little harder because I had to make the
Mm.
decision if I wanted to continue down the academic path or if I wanted to check out the real world. Having some student debt helped me choose to
Yeah.
do work. Um, and then I was fortunate enough to be able to return to the academic world.
Yeah. And so what was your first job after uni or college, as you call it in the US?
Thank you. Yeah, so I started as a corporate trainer. So there was a
Okay.
software company. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon
Yeah.
Valley. So software is what we at the time did, and we still do, although we now do other things too. But there were lots of software companies, and they were very
Yeah.
interested in the moment about me finding work, or I was very interested in finding work that could be meaningful. And
Yeah.
there was a company that was looking to hire um, people who didn't necessarily know the technology, but
Yeah.
knew how to actually teach. So I started as a software trainer,
Yeah.
not knowing the technology at all that I was training, but I did have
Yeah.
experience teaching and with communication skills. So that made it a bit easier for me.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really good lesson, isn't it? We can learn the technical skill, but often, it is those softer skills that help us deliver the technical. And of course, those can be learnt too. But it just goes to show you don't always have to have that technical acumen.
That's exactly right. And they had technical people training their courses and they were getting abysmal ratings. People weren't
Yeah.
learning. They were having more customer service issues. And so they ended up saying, let's flip the script. Let's try it
Yeah.
differently. And I and others with a teaching background or communication background were brought on. And the
Yeah.
courses ended up being more effective and efficient. And it was great for me because I learned a lot about technology, which then
Yeah.
opened up the door for the next jobs and career. Because that company was not the best company in the world. It was not well managed. And
Yeah.
my boss in particular was not the best. But as a result, I learned a tremendous amount.
Yeah. All right. So what happened next in that corporate training journey?
Yeah, so I was able to move to another company. That company was much better managed. I had an amazing boss. She was very caring, very supportive, and was very helpful in nurturing people
Yeah.
and helping them grow in their careers. And I was able to be promoted to the point where I was running the training department
Yeah.
after just a year or so. And that opened up more doors because once you show that you have the potential to deliver, you can then move on. I have learned, especially in a place where I live in Silicon Valley, everybody's connected to everybody. And
Hmm.
so make sure you're always a good, nice person. Because what ended up happening is people that worked with me at that company moved to other companies and then they said, hey, you
Yeah.
should come here. And they opened the door for me. And that turned out to be an amazing opportunity. So the third company I worked for did incredibly well in terms of
Yeah.
its impact in the world, its opportunities for its employees. And that was an amazing ride. I learned so much. We moved
Yeah.
so quickly. It was the first B2B e-commerce company ever. And
Wow.
so it was quite a ride. And as a
Yeah.
result of that, I was able to then choose where to go next. And I took another job that was positioning me to be a chief learning officer. Actually,
Yeah.
it was a fixing. So I had built three training departments, learning and development
Yeah.
departments, and then the fourth company was let's fix one that was all messed up. It was that company had done several mergers, and they brought
Yeah.
me in to rebuild. Um,
Yeah.
and so I was all positioned to become a chief learning officer, and then made the decision when I started my family that the lifestyle that would have been required for that was not what I wanted. So I went back
Yeah.
to what I love, my passion, and I actually taught high school for 2 years,
Yeah.
and then graduated. I taught at a community college, and now I teach at a graduate school. So over my career, I've graduated up until a
Yeah.
level where I don't believe I can go any further. I don't think there's any higher level I could teach at. It would all be way above my head.
Thank you. And in that training and learning and development journey, at what point did you realize that, yeah, I think I'm in the right place. I'm on the right path. What were the signs?
So I've always been passionate about learning. And the
Yeah.
fact that I could learn while helping others learn was just, it felt right. It felt good. There was
Yeah.
the right balance of creativity and focus. There was, all the companies I've worked for were small. And I
Yeah.
loved knowing that I could have access and influence to the people that I wanted. Now, I'm not saying everything was perfect. It certainly wasn't. But
Yeah.
uh, it felt good. It felt right. I would wake up in the morning excited to go do the
Yeah.
work, which I think is a huge plus. Now, that's not to say again that every day I was excited and that the excitement was always the same. But by and large, I felt really good about the work we were doing and the people I
Yeah.
was working with. Who you work with, at least for me, is really important. And can I learn from those people? Can they help me? And
Yeah.
certainly, I had that opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. And so you returned to academia. So tell us about that
Mhm.
transition. Was it strange going from I guess the corporate world back into academia, and how did you manage that transition?
Um, it, it, so um, because I was allowed the opportunity to teach topics that I was passionate about and knew
Yeah.
about and was still learning about, that felt very easy. It was like, yes, I'm able to now do full time the things that I'm really passionate about. The hard part was actually calming down and slowing down. I mean, my
Mm.
experience of academe is that it moves at a much more reasonable pace than I was, small startups in Silicon
Yeah.
Valley. I remember working so I taught high school. It was a big shift. And I remember the high school teachers just telling me how overwhelmed they were. They would get like 10 or 15 emails a day. And I'm like, I was getting 10 or 15 emails an hour. So for me, there was this detox period that has to
Yeah.
happen where I just needed to slow things down. And I certainly, because of that, I got myself involved in lots of things just because I was used to running at a pace that at least where I was teaching was not the case. So for me, the hardest transition was just becoming more present and slowing down. It is amazing how quick we move in the high
Yeah.
tech world.
Yeah. Thank you. And so at
Mhm.
what point did you take on all of these other projects in addition to your teaching? And how did that work?
so Yeah, so I am so passionate about education and about communication that I took a lot of any opportunity that afforded itself to me to help others learn.
Yeah.
I really leaned into. So it started. So the first thing I did from teaching when I was at a community college is I wrote a book. And I wrote a book not because I wanted to be an author, but because there was a
Yeah.
huge need. So my first book is all about how to manage anxiety around speaking. Many people are
Yeah.
nervous And if you look at a typical college public speaking textbook, which is what I was teaching at the time, they have 2 or 3 pages dedicated to anxiety management. And the
Yeah.
rest is all about these wonderful rhetorical ways of communicating. And my students would graduate and they'd say, "Thank you so much for the class. Once I get over my anxiety, I'll be able to use all that stuff." And I thought, what a waste. We spent this whole time and they're still
Yeah.
leaving nervous. So I would say most of the writing I have done has been out of need. So the first
Yeah.
book was to help people feel more comfortable and confident speaking. The new book is all about speaking in the moment. Most of our
Yeah.
communication isn't planned. You don't write the slide deck.
Yeah.
You don't create the meeting agenda. Somebody asks you a question, you make a mistake, you're doing small talk, you've got to respond in the moment. And again, there wasn't a lot of material out there on that topic. So
Yeah.
out of necessity, I did that. Now, the podcast was more of an experiment. And again, as I mentioned, I like to take opportunity when it presents itself. And the podcast was an opportunity to try something new. The business school at Stanford had never done a formal podcast. They
Yeah.
knew that communication topics were interesting to people. So they asked me if I'd be an experiment. And it turned out to be an experiment that worked pretty well. Part of it is we got lucky. Well, not to say lucky in the pandemic in the same sentence is just not right. But
Yeah.
during the pandemic, podcasts
Yeah.
took off. Why? People
Yeah.
were locked in place and wanted to learn. And we were about communication. And people during the pandemic were forced to figure out how to communicate
Yeah.
differently. So we were in the right place at the right time under the auspices of the right university to really
Yeah.
develop a following, and that following has only grown. So that was more experimental than the other situations in my
Yeah.
life that came out of need.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And if we go back to the topic
Mhm.
of your first book, why do you think so many
Yeah.
people struggle with anxiety around communications?
Well, first, I think it's part of being human. So
Yeah.
we see it in all cultures, and we see it
Yeah.
in kids as they become teenagers. That's when it really cranks up
Yeah.
for them. So we think it's just part of being human. Part of it is that we're being judged and evaluated, and we know that, and we want to come off well. Another part of it
Yeah.
is that we have specific goals we're trying to achieve, and we're afraid of not achieving those goals. So there's several reasons that we experience the anxiety. But what I try to, at the highest level, I try to convince people that one, it's normal and natural to feel nervous. And then two,
Yeah.
there are things you can do to learn to manage it. We're not going to overcome it. It's not going to go
Yeah.
away completely, but you can learn to manage it. And that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think there's that quote they bring out, don't they, that I think public speaking is only second to spiders in terms of people's biggest fear. Have I got that right?
Oh, well, not just spiders, but death and heights and everything. Speaking in
Yeah.
public is often the number one fear people report, which again leads us to believe it's just part of a natural condition of being human. And I'm happy to dive deeper into what we academics think might be the cause of that. But the bottom line is we feel threat when we speak, and our bodies
Yeah.
respond to that threat. So we need to reframe the situation so it doesn't seem as threatening, and
Yeah.
simultaneously learn to manage some of the symptoms that we experience so we can feel better in that moment.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And actually, I'm just thinking about my 5-year-old niece who has zero fear
Yeah,
when it comes to speaking
yeah,
out in public and communication, and so it does feel like it's something that impacts us as we get older. Like you say, hits us perhaps more at
absolutely.
teenage
Yeah,
years.
yes, when people traditionally would have become contributing members of a society where the expectations were that they would contribute, that's when we start seeing the anxiety really ramp up for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, thank you. If you could give the audience, I don't know, 3 top tips for managing that anxiety, what would
Sure,
be the best advice for
happy
them?
to do so. So let me give 3. One is deep breathing, taking deep belly breaths like you would do if you did yoga or Tai Chi,
Yeah,
where you really distend your abdomen. And in so doing, you slow down your autonomic nervous system. You want to make sure your exhales are twice as long as your inhale because the magic
yeah,
happens during the exhalation. The second thing I would suggest is that we need to remind ourselves that whenever we communicate, that we have value to bring to the people we're communicating to. The reason
yeah,
you're communicating is people have an interest. right? If you're interviewing for a job, people are interested to see if you are a good fit for the job. If you're sharing
Yeah.
on a project that you've worked on, people are interested in learning what it is you did. If you're pitching a business idea or a proposal, people are interested in that idea and proposal. Many of us forget that, and we get into our
Mm.
heads and say lots of negative things. So if you can remind yourself that you have value to bring, there's a reason you've been invited or have an opportunity to communicate. So that mental flip can be very,
Yeah.
very helpful for us. And then finally, if you can really listen, and that sounds strange because we're talking about public speaking, but it's really about listening and better understanding what's needed in that
Mm.
moment. And if you can calm down and listen, perhaps ask clarifying questions or paraphrase questions that people give to you, that
Mm.
allows you to listen better. And then you can feel more confident that you're responding appropriately. Because one of the
Yeah.
things we worry about is what I'm doing appropriate given what's transpiring. So those are the three that I would focus on: a deep breathing for the physical
Yeah.
symptoms, mindset shift to say I have value to bring, and listening so I can really connect with the audience I'm speaking to.
Fantastic. Thank you. All great tips. So,
Thanks.
so if you were to look back on your career journey today, what would you call out as the high or the proudest moments?
Oh, wow. So, the things I'm most proud of, well, a few. So, first and foremost, it is my personal and family life that I am more proud
Yeah.
of than the work life. But in terms of work, a few things. One, am very proud of the people that I hired and mentored and helped, both my students and the coworkers and colleagues that I was fortunate enough to hire. So I take great pride in their success,
Yeah.
and I think that's the right way to look at things. Certainly,
Yeah.
they helped me be successful, but it was really investing in them and their careers. I really, some of the highs had to do with creative moments where we were
Yeah.
up against the wall and we were really challenged, and we, through creativity and grit and tenacity, succeeded. So those are the moments that I remember. I mean, ultimately, what gives me the best pleasure in my work life is helping others reach their potential. When I was in high tech doing learning development, that was the same goal: giving people tools to help them be
Yeah.
successful. As a teacher, as a lecturer, it's about equipping people with tools to be successful. So that's how I measure my success professionally,
Yeah.
and it's how I hope to help people.
Yeah. Thank you. And when you look back again over your career journey so far, what would you call out as some challenges or failures or limiting beliefs you had to overcome?
Yeah, so there've been a couple situations. So I'm going to reframe your question as regrets. There were a couple times where I was not as open to others' ideas as I should have been, and we ended up
Mm.
going down a path that wasn't as beneficial.
Yeah.
There were times where I did not appreciate the larger view of the organization, and my focus
Yeah.
led me to either be slow to react or not capitalize on opportunities. Um, so those are the things that I think got in the way
Yeah.
of it. Yeah, and there were times where I was overly protective of my team or the people on my team. Again, that myopic view didn't help the bigger picture. And
Yeah.
so if I were to do those things again, I would try to re-envision how that all happened.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. Um, and I'm
Mhm.
really curious about the role of mentors and sponsors and role models on your
Mhm.
career journey, because I can sense that you're a mentor to others. But I'm curious about how those types of people influence you over the years.
So I have benefited greatly from mentors and teachers throughout my life.
Yeah.
Professionally, um, I had the boss of that one company I told you. She was fantastic. She taught me to care about the person as well as the job the person does. There was a
Yeah.
time where I was so stressed out that she looked at me and she said, "This is not healthy. You're working too much and too hard." And she forced
Yeah.
me to take a 3-week vacation. She said, "You are not
Yeah.
coming into work. We are not going to deduct this from your vacation time. And I do not want to see you online, and you are taking a vacation." And that was phenomenal because we were in the midst
Yeah.
of really high stress stuff.
Yeah.
And so she was a great mentor. She would take time to ask me about how I felt about things and what I was doing to remedy them. She would give me suggestions. Still to this day, she'll make connections for me, and I haven't worked for her in decades. So that was a strong mentor for me. Academically, I've had several mentors. One of my undergraduate advisors was just foundational into how I approach the way I teach. His philosophy was you really need to engage students and make the content relevant to their lives.
Yeah.
And he was incredibly creative as a teacher. And I strive to be just a little bit as creative as he was. But he helped me realize that we learn best, we work best when we find it meaningful to us and relevant. And there are things that we can do as teachers. And I later translated that into management when I was a manager to help people understand the relevance and significance of what we're doing. And that was critical. So Marie and Phil were two big influences in my life.
Yeah, thank you. And I think some people find it hard to find a mentor or ask someone to be their mentor. And so I'm wondering if you have any guidance for that person.
So I think now we can find mentors who aren't just immediately geographically close to us. I think tools like LinkedIn and others are really powerful. So I encourage people to seek out mentors. I find that a lot of people are willing to give advice and guidance as long as it doesn't feel too overburdensome at first. So I would be very strategic about who you look to be your mentor. And it doesn't always have to be somebody who's higher up on the food chain. It could be somebody who's got some interesting insights that can help. I know that I have benefited from people in different fields who had just some insight to provide. So first, do some targeting, do some reconnaissance, reflection, and research into who a good mentor might be. And then think about how to ask in a way that is inviting and encouraging, and share why you think the person or people you're asking could be beneficial to be mentors for you. There's this fine line between demonstrating respect and that you've done research and being a little creepy. But I think you can, try to navigate that line, going to somebody and say, I really find it fascinating how you transition from high tech into the academic world. That's something that I'm considering for myself. I'd love to chat with you. That shows me that there's a reason, right? You're not just coming to me because I teach where I teach or I teach what I teach. Obviously, you don't want to do too much work, or at least reveal that you've done too much work. But those are the kind of things. And so I would position it as, here's what I'm looking for. Here's why I think you're the right fit. And here's what I would like to have from you. I'm not asking for shadowing you 24/7. I'm asking for maybe a coffee. And that's an easier way, I think, to do it.
Yeah, that
I will
sounds
tell
good.
you this, that on my podcast, I interviewed a gentleman named Dan Pink. Dan's a great guy, well-known. He wrote a book on regrets. And one of the things he said is that he categorized different types of regrets. And the biggest by far is the inaction regret. That is, we tend to regret things we did not do, and especially as we get older. So when you're sitting there going, could I ask this person to be a mentor? Do it, because years from now, if you didn't, you might regret it. And in fact, these situations, as he reports, and in my own life I've seen, aren't as awkward and awful as we build them up to be. So try it. It won't be as bad, and you won't regret it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you've taken the action, it's done, isn't it? And then, if the person is too busy or the person doesn't reply, that's okay, but you've done your part and you can try again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if not that person, you've learned something and you can go to somebody else.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious about your view, and I suppose it's back to the Chief Learning Officer days. In organisations, often there's a training budget, and learning and development is both the responsibility of the individual and the employer. But I'm wondering if you could share some advice on, if if an employee is having a conversation with their leader and they want to have some of that training budget, can you give perhaps some guidance around how to approach that topic? Because often it can feel like a bit of a, a budget that's not for everybody.
Yes, and that's a shame. So that's shame on the people running learning and development, because they need to make it available if they're going to have a program like that, and I think everybody should. When I was running those departments, it was a very easy argument to make that further equipping employees helps them do their jobs now and builds retention, because they feel connected to the organization. They see that the organization cares. So it is a very effective lever to build connection between employees and an organization. And quite frankly, it's a relatively cheap one. When you run the numbers on what it costs to exit an employee from a company, to bring on a new employee, to ramp them up, it is far more expensive from a company's point of view to do that than it is to run training programs or have stipends for people who can go learn. So I'm now speaking to the people that run those organizations, but you as a participant or as a potential participant need to understand that these programs are there for you. I think just like the suggestions I made regarding mentors, I do think it is important to have a plan, to articulate what it is you're hoping to gain and how that information will help you in your career and in your current role. So as you go to somebody, if there's an existing program or one you want funding for, explain the value that it will have for you, and then in turn the value for the company, and how you'll accommodate the learning given the tasks that you have, right? Because many managers and organizations are like, hey, we support you learning this, but what about the job you've got? So you have to demonstrate that you've thought through how to do that. So again, I think putting together a pitch where you talk about why and the benefits to you and the organization is the way to do it. And a great way to do it is to just ask the people around you how they've done it, what seems to be successful. And you can ask your managers to say, have you benefited from these programs? And what did you take? And help them get on your side and say, hey, I took the communication course and I did this and that, and it helped me. I think you should do the same. So sometimes asking rather than telling can be helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. So for people who are going into the workplace or thinking about changing careers, what would be, I guess, the most important elements of communication skills that person should be, practicing and developing that skill of as we go into the future of work and in-demand skills and so on?
Yeah, so a couple things to be thinking about. One is listening. First and foremost, I always start there. We all have to work to become better listeners so that we can respond appropriately. Especially as a new employee who doesn't know as much, who might feel like they are in lower status relative to others. We want to respond. We want to demonstrate our expertise, our value that we bring. And that's great. But listen first, so you make sure you understand what you're responding to. So that's number one. Number two, realize that you are working in a workforce now that is diverse in so many ways. You've got different genders, you have different cultures, you have different ages, and the way people work and the way people expect you to work is predicated on all of this diversity, and you have to respect and reflect on that. So if you're talking to somebody of my age, if you're newly out of university and you're talking to somebody my age, you need to think about what are the modalities that I might want to communicate in. So sending me a Slack message might not be the most effective way. Maybe coming over and talking to me, picking up the phone and using it to make a call instead of a text. So we just have to be more aware of the diversity that we have in our organizations and adjust and accommodate the way that we communicate and interact. That, of course, isn't to say don't lose yourself in that. If you have specific desires and needs that you have to communicate, make sure you express those. So I think it's awareness around the diversity piece. Listening is an active process. And then finally, I say this all the time, when you speak, make sure you structure and organize your content well. Most people do not respond positively to being taken on the journey of discovery of what you want to say as you're saying it. We much rather would learn from you. So take a moment to think through what you want to say. Be what's the value that you bring to the conversation rather than just starting talking.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you. What do you
Yes.
know now that you wish you'd known when you were just starting out on your career journey?
I love this question. This is the question I encourage all the people I ever teach to interview to end the interview with. Because the interviewer will always say, do you have any questions for me? And that's the question that I tell people to ask. What do you wish
Yeah.
you knew when you were being interviewed for the job that you have? Because you learn so many insightful things. I think it really comes down to three things I wish I would have known. First, that it is okay to not be certain, to not know everything that you want to do and where you're going to go. A lot of people, and I think universities and colleges don't help. I think we perpetuate this myth that we're preparing you for something. So when you
Yeah.
graduate, you feel like I'm ready for the something, that this certainty. And it's just not that way. Things aren't as certain. So I wish I would have known that, because I felt a lot of time feeling bad that I didn't know for certain what I needed or wanted. And that's normal. Second, and this is when I moved into management. It was so important to me back then to be liked, and I would do things to get people to like me that allowed them to take advantage of me. And what I learned as a new manager is that what's more important is to be respected than liked. And if you're respected, ultimately you will be liked. So I was walked all over by some of my early employees, not out of malice, although sometimes maybe, but I was over accommodating as a manager up front because I wanted to be liked. And then finally, in terms of work, bring your full self to work. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to not know. It's okay to be curious. So I often felt that, this was my job. I'm supposed to be an expert in this job, and this is who I am. And in fact, bringing your whole self, I think is really, really important. And that's what builds the liking and the respect. So those would be the three things I wish I knew back then. I'm still working on all of them, by the way. I am by no means an expert on these, but at least I have a little insight and hindsight that's helpful.
Yeah. And what would you say to young Matt who wanted to work in film and go to film school? And did you
I would say you
regret
made
it?
the right choice. No, I have never regretted that decision. I certainly have been curious about that decision. But I would say to myself that you made the right choice. I have ended up in a place where I'm very, very happy in my life and fulfilled. But I have also taken opportunities to dabble or explore in that world just because I was curious. So, for example, when I was in graduate school, I had an opportunity to be an intern at George Lucas, the famous movie producer and director. His whole setup was not very far from where I went to graduate school. And I was able to be an intern there. And it was an amazing experience. And they did great things. But I realized that I was not the type of person. And of course, he's doing it at a level that I never would have. But I imagined that this would not have been the fit that I had hoped it would have been when I was a young boy dreaming about that. So I got some closure on that piece. But that said, a lot of podcasting, as you well know, there's a lot of production elements that are similar to producing movies and television. So in some ways, I'm scratching that itch, but I'm doing it from a very different place than I had originally thought I wanted.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I'm wondering if you have any favorite quotes or expressions or mantras that you live by and would like to share with the audience.
Yes. So there are a few. My favorite quote of all time comes, I don't know if it's from somewhere else, but I heard it in a very silly movie called Buckaroo Banzai. And in the quote is, no matter where you go, there you are. And I am somebody who is always future thinking, and I'm always thinking about opportunities and the ability to be present is something that I constantly work on. I know there's more Zen-like responses like be here now. There are lots of quotes that I like that have to do with being present. And then there's a quote from my mother that I know she didn't create that's very important to me in my life, as your listeners will attest. I tend to talk more than I need to. And my mother has this wonderful quote, tell the time, don't build the clock. And I and others can be clock builders. And I think it's really important to just tell the time when appropriate. So I'm working on that
Yeah.
one myself, to just tell the time.
Yeah, thank you. And before we move towards wrapping up, I'm just wondering if there are any other communication tips we should share with the
Hmm.
audience, whether it be on
I
networking
have
or
plenty of
presenting or.
tips. Yeah, plenty of tips. So let me distill it down to just a few. First, when it comes to mindset, communication is an opportunity. It's not a threat or a challenge. When you communicate, you have an opportunity to connect, to share, to learn. Many of us see these situations like a job interview or when somebody
Mm,
asks you for feedback as a challenge that's been put before us, and we have to compete and we have to defend and so first and foremost, communication literally means to make common. In other words,
yeah.
it's about collaboration, it's about
Mm,
connection. So reframing it as such is helpful. Second, it is about your audience. It is not about you. It's not about what you want to say. It's about what they need to learn. And reminding yourself of that means that you will adjust and adapt your content based on what you know about your audience. And that's why listening is so
yeah.
important. And then finally, leveraging structure, listing information, bullet points, that is not helpful. Our brains literally cannot take that kind of information. As well as telling a story, something that has a beginning, a
Yeah.
middle, and an end, organizing your points in a logical way. If you're pitching somebody to try to convince them, explain the problem, explain your solution, explain your benefits. That type of structure
Yeah.
really helps. So if you can adapt those three bits of advice, your communication will be easier, likely better, and more effective.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, Matt, what's your secret to happiness and fulfillment at work?
Oh gosh, I wish I had a secret for that. I'm still striving for it. I think for me, what has helped, besides getting older and getting perspective, is decoupling happiness from fulfillment.
Hmm.
Um, Happiness to me is more transitory, and it's very dependent on other people and the situation and context. Fulfillment to me is very different. Fulfillment is very personal, it's deeper, it stays longer. So I am very fulfilled in my career. Am I happy with my career at all points and times? No. Especially when I have big stacks of things to grade. I'm not so happy, but I am very fulfilled. So for me, I think the biggest realization that has helped, and I'm still working on this, is decoupling happiness from fulfillment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good lesson. If people want to
Still
find
working on
out
it.
more, yeah, a life's work.
Yes.
If people want to find out more about you or communication in general, where should they go?
Thank you for asking. So, first and foremost, I would love for people to listen in to Think Fast, Talk Smart. You get to learn a lot about communication, and I try to be genuine, and you learn a lot about me too. Uh, I, my website, mattabrahams.com, is a one stop shop for everything. And I'm a big user of LinkedIn, and I think
Yeah.
LinkedIn is a great tool, especially for the people who listen into your podcast. So,
Yeah.
find me on LinkedIn, connect. Maybe I can help be a mentor in some way for you as well.
Thank you. And before we go, Matt, I'd just love to understand if you have any other words of encouragement or wisdom that, those out there who aren't lucky enough to be taught or mentored by you might enjoy hearing.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. The advice I give my kids, the advice I give my students is stay open to opportunity. Opportunity can seem daunting, it can seem amorphous, ambiguous, but in opportunity comes potentially amazing things. So I have tried to optimize my whole life for taking opportunities, or at least exploring opportunities. I'm not saying say yes to everything,
Yeah.
but avoid making choices that shut down opportunities if you can.
Yeah.
Certainly, there are life circumstances where you have to just do things. If you need to make
Yeah.
rent, you need to work, right? But
Yeah.
are there jobs you could take that potentially lead to other opportunities? So the biggest thing I try to advise people, because it's been so meaningful in my life, is to optimize for opportunity. Again, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you say yes to everything, but put yourself in circumstances where opportunity comes and try to avoid making choices that shut down opportunities. So if you're a student and you're deciding, do I really need to get good grades, or should I really take that course? If that course or those grades afford you some different opportunities, then yeah, you might consider doing that. So that
Yeah.
I think is the biggest bit of advice I could give to anybody. Try not to limit opportunities, because you never know where they'll take you. I am doing something I never expected to be doing. I love doing it, and
Yeah.
it's very fulfilling. And that's
Yeah.
because I was open to opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a great lesson, because like we were saying at the beginning, we're often being prepared for something. And if we don't know what that something is, it probably will still be okay.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Matt, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm sure the audience are going to really benefit from this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. You're doing good work, and I hope something I said can be helpful to somebody somewhere.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining Matt and I today. We really hope you found this episode valuable. And if you did, share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, have a think about those tips and insights Matt shared. How could you boost your confidence and communication skills? Have a great week, whatever you're up to. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.